Is Apple about to be forced to put Fortnite back on the App Store? In a dramatic escalation of their years-long legal battle, Epic Games has just asked a federal judge to force Apple to approve Fortnite for iOS users in the United States. This move could reshape how all apps work on your iPhone. You've probably heard about the Epic versus Apple saga before, but today's developments have taken this tech industry battle to a whole new level. Epic Games has officially asked Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers to compel Apple to approve Fortnite for distribution on the U.S. App Store, accusing the tech giant of being in contempt of court for the second time in just a few weeks. The timing couldn't be more significant. Just last month, Judge Gonzalez Rogers delivered a scathing ruling against Apple, finding the company in willful violation of her previous orders about App Store rules. She even went as far as referring an Apple executive to U.S. attorneys for potentially lying under oath, an extraordinary move that signals just how heated this case has become. So, how did we get here? The battle began back in August 2020, when Epic deliberately updated Fortnite to bypass Apple's payment system, essentially declaring war on Apple's 30% commission. Apple promptly removed Fortnite from the App Store, and Epic immediately filed an antitrust lawsuit. Since then, iPhone users in the US haven't been able to download Fortnite, leaving millions of mobile gamers unable to access one of the world's most popular games on iOS devices. That's almost 5 years without Fortnite on iPhones in America. In 2021, Judge Gonzalez Rogers issued a mixed ruling. She didn't find Apple to be a monopoly, but she did rule that Apple's anti-steering provisions violated California law. This meant Apple had to allow developers to inform users about alternative payment options outside the App Store. But here's where things got messy. Instead of fully complying with the spirit of the ruling, Apple implemented what the judge later called malicious compliance. They allowed links to outside payment options but added a 27% commission on those purchases anyway, plus warning screens that might discourage users from leaving Apple's ecosystem. The judge wasn't having it. On April 30th, 2025, she found Apple in contempt of court, writing that Apple willfully chose not to comply with this court's injunction, and that Apple's thinking this court would tolerate such insubordination was a gross miscalculation. Fast forward to May 17th, today, and Epic has submitted a new motion. According to documents shared by Epic, Apple is refusing to process Fortnite's submission to the App Store until after the Ninth Circuit Court rules on Apple's appeal for a partial stay of the new injunction. Epic claims this is pure retaliation and directly contradicts Apple's promises to the court. The game developer points out that Apple expressly and repeatedly told Epic and the court it would approve Fortnite if the app complied with Apple's guidelines, which Epic insists its current submission does. What makes this situation even more complicated is that Epic has submitted Fortnite twice recently, most recently to include content from an update to the EU version of the game. But instead of Apple approving Fortnite in the US, the game actually disappeared from the EU App Store entirely. When asked about this, Apple claimed it had merely requested that Epic resubmit the app without including the US storefront so as not to impact Fortnite in other geographies. But Epic argues this would require creating multiple versions of the same app, which they claim violates Apple's own developer guidelines. The economic stakes here are massive. The mobile gaming market generates billions in revenue annually, and Fortnite has been one of the most lucrative titles in gaming history. For Epic, being locked out of the iOS ecosystem in the US means missing out on a significant revenue stream and user base. Apple, meanwhile, is fighting to preserve its control over its platform and the commission structure that generates enormous profits. The company earned an estimated $85 billion from App Store fees in 2024 alone, and any precedent that weakens its grip could impact future earnings significantly. For other developers, this case represents hope for a more open ecosystem. Several major companies, including Spotify and Netflix, have long complained about Apple's policies. Following the April contempt ruling, developers like Amazon and Spotify quickly updated their apps to direct customers to external payment options, potentially saving millions in commission fees. The judge's decision on this latest motion could set a significant precedent about how platform owners like Apple must treat developers with whom they have ongoing disputes. If she orders Apple to approve Fortnite, it would mark a major victory for Epic and potentially accelerate the opening of Apple's traditionally closed ecosystem. Epic CEO Tim Sweeney has suggested a potential global resolution, stating, if Apple extends the court's friction-free, Apple tax-free framework worldwide, we'll return Fortnite to the App Store worldwide and drop current actions. However, Epic faces an uphill battle. Throughout this case, Judge Gonzalez Rogers has not previously gone so far as to require Fortnite's return to the App Store. In her 2021 ruling, she found that Epic had knowingly broken its developer agreement with Apple when it implemented its alternative payment system. What might work in Epic's favor this time is the judge's apparent frustration with Apple, as evidenced by her April ruling where she accused the company of deliberate attempts to undermine her original order. The fact that she referred an Apple executive for potential criminal contempt proceedings shows just how seriously she's taking Apple's behavior. For gamers, the most pressing question remains, when will Fortnite return to iOS in the US? The answer depends entirely on how the judge rules on this latest motion, and whether Apple continues to fight or eventually decides to settle the dispute. The implications extend far beyond just Fortnite. This case could reshape the entire app economy, potentially forcing Apple and other platform owners to loosen their grip on developers and create more competitive marketplaces with lower fees and fewer restrictions. So, what happens next? Judge Gonzalez Rogers will now consider Epic's motion. Given her recent ruling against Apple, she might be inclined to force Apple's hand. However, legal experts note that forcing Apple to approve a specific app would be an unusual step for a federal judge. Apple will certainly continue its appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court, arguing that the judge's order unlawfully prevents the company from controlling core aspects of its business operations. Apple's lawyers have claimed that complying would cost the company substantial sums annually. As this legal drama continues unfolding, millions of Fortnite fans wait to see if they'll finally be able to download the game on their iPhones again. The outcome could determine not just the fate of one game, but potentially the future of how apps are distributed and monetized across the entire digital landscape. What do you think? Should Apple be forced to allow Fortnite back on the App Store, or should they be able to decide which apps they host? Let me know in the comments.